Hello, and welcome back to Purpose of Heart, the podcast. I'm your host, Priscilla Allman, and today we're talking about something that actually doesn't get enough credit for in our busy, performance-driven society. The simple act of just showing up. Sometimes the most powerful ministry isn't about having the perfect words, the perfect plan, the perfect anything. Sometimes it's just about presence, just being there when someone's hurting, when someone's celebrating, or even when life feels ordinary and unnoticed. God uses presence in ways that we can't see. And sometimes the most healing thing that we can do is not always to offer advice, but we can offer ourselves. There's something so deeply human about presence. Have you ever been to like a hard season where someone didn't come and try and fix your pain and fix everything, but instead they just sat with you? Maybe they didn't say much. Maybe they were just there. Maybe they were there just because what you were going through was just too much for words. Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep." That's what Jesus did. He entered our pain. He stepped into our joy. He didn't just send comfort, he became it. You know, one of the verses that I feel like you kind of always learn as a little kid, especially because it's one of the shortest verses in the Bible. It's only 2 words, right? And a lot of times my brother actually would use that to his advantage because you know, for our church, for birthdays, you say like verses that start with the letter of your name, and his name starts with J. And so he'd try and get over on my mom, say like, oh no, I can just say this verse because it's 2 words, you don't have to think too much about it. But it's Jesus wept, right? And if we just take a step back and actually just think about that he wept, right? If we think about the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, right? They call him, they say, Lazarus is sick. The message gets to him, and Jesus doesn't come right away. And when he gets there, they're like, he's already dead. He's been dead now for a few days. He's like, move, the stone. But before that, he showed emotion, right? And an understanding that I've more recently come to know is that when he wept, it was a way that he was showing that he wasn't callous to the pain, right? Like, even though he knew that Lazarus was going to come back from the dead, that everything was just going to be fine, he also grieved his friend and realized the impact of what his death had on that family. And so he wept. And so just know that he shows up and he understands our pain. Yeah, Jesus wept. God shows us as an example, right? He says that he comes as a comforter, right? And it's what God calls us to do too, to show up for people, right? Even when it is uncomfortable or inconvenient. And that's not to say that you make unwise decisions or that you even, um, you know, take on other people's emotions to the point that it's detrimental to you. But just know that your presence can preach louder than your voice. One of the most beautiful things is that we serve a God who shows up. He didn't ever stay detached or distant. From the very beginning of time, once he created man, it showed that every day he, wanted to speak with Adam. He came close in the form of Jesus, Emmanuel, which means God with us. John 1:14 says, and the word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's presence, showing up. He didn't just visit our story as humanity, he entered it. He sat with the broken, he touched the untouchable, and walked with those who the world had forgotten or deemed unacceptable to even acknowledge. And today, he still shows up for you. When you're crying in your car, when you are quietly overwhelmed, when you're celebrating the small wins, no one else notices. He's there. And when we choose to show up for others, we are reflecting him. We're reminding the world that love isn't just about these big, grand gestures, but it's also about faithful presence. And you might be thinking, sometimes just showing up feels kind of small, like I'm only just here. But friend, can I tell you something? Sometimes just being there is really important. Showing up at your child's game, texting that friend who's been a little quiet lately, sitting beside a loved one in the hospital, praying with someone after church, or even showing up for yourself. Giving yourself permission to rest and breathe again. Galatians 6:2 says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. That's what showing up does. Helps someone carry the weight for a little while. Maybe you think that your offering is small, but God sees it. Because it's not about what you do, it's about who you're present for. And maybe, just maybe, the person that really needs you to show up right now is you. Maybe you've been pouring out for everyone else, but God is whispering to your spirit, son, daughter, show up for yourself. Let me minister to you at this time. When we consistently show up in our families, our communities, in our faith, something beautiful happens. Trust grows, love deepens, and people begin to see Jesus through the way we simply choose to be present. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Hebrews 10:24-25. In other words, don't stop showing up. make sure, we're gathering together and going to church and also showing up for the people that God has placed in our lives. Because showing up says you matter. You're not alone. And I care enough to be here. I want to leave you with this thought. You may never know the impact that you have on someone else's life, but God sees it. Every moment you show up in love, even when it costs you something, God is using it for His glory. Don't underestimate the power of your presence and showing up. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that their presence matters. Keep showing up for others, for yourself. Because sometimes your presence is really the miracle that someone needs. And that's someone has been praying for. Something that has always left me a bit in awe is having the privilege to be able to be the answer to someone's prayer. And I don't think we sit and think about that as much as we should. That literally going and showing up at something, being there for a friend when they really need it, is actually can be an answer to prayer, because we don't actually know what's going on in their lives or their deepest thoughts. But we showed up, we sort of listened to that quiet nudging in our spirit to do something, to send a text, to make a call. And that was what they needed to lift their spirits just a little bit. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to partner with God and able to be the one that's used to be the answer to someone's prayer. And I think we should all count it as amazing privileges that He allows us to do that. So, until next time, friends, keep showing up, because your presence may very well be the thing that someone is praying for. Bye, friends.